So we'll get going. My pleasure to do the introductions this morning. The title of this morning's talk is, you can see it there on the screen, CHEO, Kick the Carbon Strategy, Children's Health and Climate Change Action. We have two presenters this morning. I'll start with Curtis. He's a physician here at CHEO, where he's worked for 21 years, and where he co-founded the CHEO Green Team 12 years ago. He has a special interest in environmental sustainability and healthcare, and has been advocating and speaking widely on this topic for the last 10 years. You can find some newspaper articles. He's also a part-time adult emergency physician at the Montfort Hospital and teaches mindfulness at the University of Ottawa Medical School. I will say any resemblance to Curtis and a green-caped Earth Day superhero, colloquially known as the Green Stetho, are purely coincidental. Many have commented on that. It's remarkable. And then Richard. Richard is a biostatistician at the Clinical Research Unit. As an investigator at CHEO, he has over 50 publications and is a PI or co-investigator on approximately $3 million of funded projects. Prior to joining us here at CHEO, he was a fellow at Health Canada, working at the Environmental Health Center's Genomic Laboratory. Dr. Webster currently holds the CHEO Popham Fellowship, where he is doing research, which he's using to do research on low carbon healthcare. Outside of CHEO, Richard drives an electric vehicle and lives in a very nice energy efficient home. I've seen it. It's beautiful. It's on the river with a heat pump. Ironically, over the past few days, his house has been powered by a gas generator, thanks to the electrical outages. So guys, take it away.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Derek. Thanks for that introduction. All right, guys. Well, welcome to the 2022 Earth Day rounds. Today, we're going to be talking about Kick the Carbon. And I'm very excited about this program and initiative at CHEO. So what is Kick the Carbon? Obviously, it has to do with children's health and climate change. This is something that we've taken on at CHEO over the last few years, over the pandemic period. And our goals today really are to kind of get you up to speed on that, maybe understand a little bit more why it's so important to CHEO and so important to all of us, and really hopefully get you kind of jazzed up about the whole initiative. It's a long-term initiative. We're going to be talking probably a lot of detail. I say probably Richard's going to be taking on some of the really nitty-gritty. I'm going to give you sort of more of the background. So, like I said, this is our 2022. This is actually 10 years after the first Green Earth Day grand rounds that we had, where we first started to talk about, me as the representative of the Green Team that started just a year or two before that, talk about sustainable healthcare at CHEO. And I say this is a great moment. 10 years later, I'm really happy with where we've come. We've had a lot of fun along the way. I don't know if you guys remember who was at any of these initial rounds. The Battle of the Two Alexes was, I think, probably the most memorable. We talked a lot about healthcare and the stress and the relationship between stress and anxiety and decision making and climate change. And last year, or actually our last rounds was really talking about how the Earth has changed so significantly over the last few decades, and the really amazing message that this is Greta Thunberg that she put forward about our need to change our actions on a planetary level because our house is on fire and our hospital is on fire. And that's a metaphor. We can explain that a little better later. So as alluded to by Dare, we've all experienced climate events. I think in the last couple of days, I know on my block, this power pole is still knocked down, along with some major trees. There's a lot of destruction in the city. There's been deaths reported in Ontario and in Quebec as a result of a storm that they're calling a Derico. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but a Derico, which is sort of this random one of these new type of weather events that nobody's ever heard of, which came and plowed through our city, knocking down trees and power poles and causing a lot of destruction. I do feel sorry for Richard, who sent me this picture on Saturday, where his buddy, who's an arborist, had to come to his house to take care of a tree that had fallen right onto his house. You can see his heat pump that Dare mentioned right there in the bottom. and caused really significant damage. So I know we're all really living through this now. I know a lot of you have lost a lot of things, a lot of trees, and damaged your infrastructure, and are still without electricity. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate that that it may not be easy. But I do want to talk about the sort of bigger picture around this. Now, bigger picture actually goes back a few years. We experienced something similar in 2018, which was a devastating tornado storm where we had several touchdowns of tornadoes and wiped out a lot of infrastructure, especially east of the city. 2017 and 2019, we experienced quite severe floods in Ottawa. You know, we're starting to get a picture that things are changing a lot. We're experiencing heat events, severe heat events, where there's been heat warnings, and in BC last year, there was a heat dome over a major section of the coast, which resulted in an estimated 600 deaths. I think I've heard higher at 750 deaths as a result directly of the heat. So this is above the expected death rates. And there's really good statistics to show that how that relates to the heat, how there's a little bit of a delay by a day or two, and how this death rate is very, very severe as a result. We're also experiencing major snowstorms that are kind of out of keeping with normal. We're experiencing water events and mudslides. These are pictures of BC, and then droughts in Alberta. And really, over the last 4 decades or so, the number of severe climate events and disasters has increased significantly compared to the sort of half century before that. I think it's not surprising to most of us now that this is happening. We really think acutely aware of it, but there is a reason for it. And I guess it comes back to this whole idea of global warming. We used to call it global warming, but it's not really about the warming. You know, a couple of degrees is not really that much of a scare, right? You know, think on a daily basis, our temperature varies a lot, but from a global perspective, this is causing the weather to be just downright weird. So why is it getting weird? It's getting weird because the Earth is a very complex system. It has very sophisticated and complex hydrological systems, atmospheric systems, geological systems, lots of different cycles that are intertwined with the physicality of the planet. It's resulting in a destabilization. Carbon levels in the atmosphere have been stable for probably millions of years, and certainly for the whole of our evolution as a species. And we've been very used to a very narrow range of temperatures and climate events. And with this small change in carbon dioxide and the small increase in temperature, we really severely destabilized the whole climate. The result is that, as a result of carbon dioxide emissions, largely carbon dioxide emissions, but there are other greenhouse gases, we're getting what we're now calling climate change. And climate change, in addition to destabilizing the weather systems and causing extreme weather, is also causing ocean acidification, changes in rainfall patterns, and sea level rise, as well as, like I said before, extreme temperatures. As a kind of a co-problem with climate change, as a result of emissions, we're also seeing other pollutants in the area, especially particulates. And this is what's causing the problem. Getting more heat waves, droughts, and fires and floods. All of this with the ocean acidification resulting in decreased agricultural activity, causing damage to infrastructure, making it more and more difficult to work in these extreme environments. We're losing biodiversity. Our ecosystems are a threat of collapse. Some of them have collapsed. And all together, as a species, humans are experiencing more problems with undernutrition. We already had quite disparate food supplies, but now the hardest hit areas are getting hit even harder because of climate change. We're having impacts on mental health. cardiovascular disease and respiratory disease are being affected. This is not just the temperature, but also the particulates that are floating around the atmosphere. In the emergency department over the last 25 years, I've certainly seen an increase in asthma and severe cardiovascular disease. Obviously multifactorial there, but we're looking at a trajectory that's very worrisome. And vector-borne diseases are becoming an increasing problem. In the height of the pandemic, I had secondary Lyme disease. The fever was not due to COVID, as I discovered. And all of these things working together are going to be accentuated by things like loss of habitation, poverty, mass migration, which we're experiencing as a result of violent conflict, but violent conflict is also going to be likely to increase because we know that conflict is related to resource and basic availability of things like food and water, and multiple other social determinants like age and sex and socioeconomic status are going to compound these problems for a lot of people. So getting back to the problem, carbon dioxide, what are we doing about it? Well, you have to realize that we have a pretty severe addiction to fossil fuels, which are the main source of carbon dioxide emissions from humanity. Over the last 150 years, we've seen an exponential rise in carbon emissions from all of the consumption. And, I probably among you, some of you with me, were kind of hopeful that during the pandemic, we'd kind of come to a realization that we don't need all this stuff. And at the very least, that by not flying as much and not driving as much, we would have a significant reduction in our carbon emissions. Unfortunately, really across the planet, we saw maybe a 5% reduction temporarily in 2020 in our emissions. But in 2021 and 2022, these emissions have retaken and surpassed prior emissions. So this data only goes to 2020. But even with that small reduction, you have to understand that carbon dioxide hangs around in the atmosphere for 200 to 300 years. So it has an impact that's very prolonged. And overall, the carbon dioxide levels have continued to rise. These are carbon dioxide levels that have been measured over the last 10 years. But going back 50 years, we have good data from a station called Mauna Loa in Hawaii, which shows this really classic cycling of carbon dioxide levels, probably due to, I'm not sure the origins of the cycling, but it's due to something to do with the atmospheric sort of circulation. And this cycling, but persistent march of carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere towards an unprecedented level. We passed 400 a few years ago. Normal levels were around 300, and this is parts per million. So carbon dioxide is really potent, right? Even at 400 parts per million, so much less than a percentage of the actual content of our air that we breathe. Carbon dioxide has a very potent effect, and its ability to warm the planet, the whole planet with just such a small concentration, is quite incredible, but also quite dangerous. And as we head up into the mid 400s, we're looking at increasing temperature changes. So we need to turn around our carbon emissions, because every gram, every kilogram, every ton, every megaton of carbon dioxide gets emitted into the atmosphere is going to change the trajectory of the temperature of the planet. I put these curves in because at some point we're going to turn around our carbon emissions. We have to turn around our carbon emissions. And the sooner we do it, the better, because over time, this is sort of like a 50 to 100-year scale. Over time, the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is really changing the trajectory of the temperature of the planet for centuries to come. And although even if we turned around right in the next 10 years, we're still easily going to hit 1.5 degrees Celsius. It's easy to see 3 or even more elevations in the temperature. And we also know that ecosystems and species are very sensitive to this change in global climate. And we know that we've already had a lot of biodiversity loss, which basically means complete extinction of various species. we know that we're all kind of on this trajectory. So if we plot carbon emissions versus survival, we already know that down here, the coral reefs are very in danger. Unless we can turn around in the next 10 years, we're facing almost complete extinction of the coral reefs in the next 20 years. Now, when I say complete extinction, I'm talking about not tomorrow, but because of the warming is going to continue, and because of the carbon dioxide that's already out there, it's going to continue to warm the planet for 300 years. Within the next 50 years, coral reefs, it's almost impossible that coral reefs are going to survive. But at some point, where are we on this scale? We cannot survive the extreme temperatures that could be possible with the trajectory of carbon emissions. And what would the planet look like at that point? I'm still here. Don't worry, I'm still here. I'm not frozen. Just, I guess I think this is the hit home point here. And I know I've made this point before, but I think really there is hope today, not just at CHEO, but I think from a global perspective, people are really starting to move on this problem. And pandemic has really allowed the technology for people to get together and move on things, like on a lot of aspects of medicine in general. I think people have really done a lot of thinking about how to approach it, how to conceptualize the problem. People are talking now not just about sort of public health and global health, but planetary health, and how our actions are affecting the natural ecosystems and how that really impacts us. And I think the big message here is that we need to do that the climate crisis is a kid's health issue, and that we're all going to be impacted, and we all need to work on it, not just at the hospital, obviously, but across the planet. And at CHEO, we've been doing this for 10 years now. This is the early days of the green team. You can see some older members here, people that are retired or moved on, but people have been trying to really get their heads around this at the hospital. But in 2019, actually just before the pandemic started, the hospital convened a committee to start to look at really making a big leap forward at CHEO. This is the initial committee members. And I want to point out Faisal here, because I know he's not a big face in the hospital, but Faisal's been doing amazing work behind the scenes, and I think really helped us to leapfrog forward, and I'll explain that in a minute. But suffice to say, the message about children's health and the importance of moving on this issue at the hospital really took off in 2019. And we had big plans for 2020, but the pandemic kind of got in the way. But why are we doing this at the hospital? Why is it not just outside the hospital? We're doing this at the hospital because the healthcare system is a huge consumer, and we're in the middle of that. We're right in there consuming. To do a good job in healthcare at this point in history, we need to consume a lot. We need to have big infrastructure. We need to have a lot of products. And the total footprint of healthcare is probably, at Canada, we're actually doing pretty good, but it's at least 4% of our total emissions for the country. So 4% of hundreds of thousands of tons of carbon dioxide comes to about, actually millions of tons of carbon dioxide, comes to about 31 million tons from healthcare alone. A ton, remember, a ton is a huge amount when you've only got less than 0.5% of carbon dioxide in your atmosphere. So healthcare has a big impact. And they say that if you took all healthcare together across the planet, that it would be, if it was a country, it would be the 5th largest emitter of carbon dioxide. So it has a big impact. What CHEO has basically done is made this a strategic direction for the hospital, that this is another one of our bottom lines now, that we really need to work on this. And we're taking carbon footprint as the metric for the hospital. Now, carbon footprint, just to understand, when you talk about carbon footprint, it's not a simple thing, but just a basic understanding so that everybody that has a concept of this is that product consumption is the biggest single component of our footprint. Energy and water is about 15 to 20%. Transportation, including you guys getting to hospital and patients getting to hospital and home, is about another 15, 20%. So two-thirds of it is product consumption. And again, to further, just a little bit further understand it, that includes getting stuff and using stuff. So every time we use something, whether it be in the operating room or in the cleaning of spaces or in the emergency department, that has a footprint. And this is just a way of taking responsibility for our part of the emissions from society. Waste and recycling fits into that consumption point. That's where we can make a difference on the other end, what we do with it afterwards. These are obviously much more complex. There's a lot of things that goes into it. We consume a lot of products at the hospital. Energy is probably the simplest of these because we have electricity and natural gas is the major component there. Just to understand that there's actually 12 different waste streams at the hospital. Obviously, the paper, plastic, and metal recycling, cardboard recycling are really, really important. And then transportation, although there's only two labels there, cars and air flights. Bicycles have no impact, so I didn't even list them there. But private cars and air flights, the things that make this complex is that we have so many people working at the hospital and so many patients that need to get here. So we've gone after the big jellies so far. These are the big jellies: energy and water. And the plan at CHEO, well, actually the big accomplishment I want to announce to you guys today is that we've already moved through the first phase. We're well into the second phase of a big energy and savings. This is where Faisal has been working hard on energy. He's an energy specialist. He comes from the University of Ottawa. And just by tweaking the systems, really getting in and actually, to some extent, manually switching things over when needed, he's been able to save almost $300,000 as well as 400 tons of carbon dioxide at the hospital level, which is amazing. He's really brilliant in that aspect. But he's gone forth to put forward a plan, and I'm happy to say that the CHEO board has approved a 5-year plan for increasing our investment. So the next step, like the low-hanging fruit, required no money except for Faisal to go in and change things around. But the next steps are going to involve more investment. And that's generally true for fighting greenhouse gas emissions at any level. There's some low-hanging fruit. And then, but the next investments, although we're talking up to $5 million here, have a really significant return in terms of energy feedback and also in terms of carbon dioxide saved. We're talking about thousands and thousands of tons of carbon dioxide saved every year on the energy front. So we've got a great plan going forward, and the board's improved it. And that's just the first step of our carbon footprint analysis. So we're into the jellies, the big jellies of energy and water. But there's lots of other really tasty morsels out there. And that's where I really hope to get you guys involved. In fact, we need everybody in the hospital at some point involved in this long-term project. And it's going to be tasty. So is this doable? Can we really tackle the global footprint, the carbon footprint of the hospital? And I could say that we're not the first ones to have this idea, but we are leaders within the hospital sector. The National Health System in England has been thinking about this for a long time, and they were the first to come out with a net zero plan. And their plan is within the next 25 years or so to have a net zero healthcare service. So their entire system to net zero. It's a complex analysis. I think it's very well researched. It's got lots of great ideas. It's basically a world leader in terms of healthcare systems. But as of 8 months ago, at the last United Nations Climate Change Conference that was held in Glasgow, there was an amazing initiative where 14 countries actually signed on to the same thing, basically said, we're going to do this as well. In fact, 45 countries have really committed to transforming and trying to establish a net zero for their healthcare system, including Canada. So we're not alone in this. In fact, we're not alone really across the healthcare sectors. There's many different organizations now that have come to the forefront to really try to work on the footprint of healthcare. And they're looking at consumption, at hospitals probably being the main source of consumption in the healthcare system. And if you look on the bottom right, the HSO and Accreditation Canada, Health Standards Organization and Accreditation Canada are also taking this on. So this is going to become, they've really, actually, Richard and I are working with them to try and develop this and move it forward. Standards for hospitals and healthcare system in general to look at their sustainability and their footprint. So really the question now is, how do we take this Kick the Carbon initiative? How far can we take this? We're hoping that we can really embrace a net zero by 2047. 2047, partly because CHEO will be 75 years old then, and it will be a really good opportunity to showcase. And by doing that, we'll take a leadership position in hospitals. There's a few hospitals that talk about net zero in terms of energy, but to do the whole scope, I know it's a big journey. It looks complicated. Richard's going to talk a little bit more about it, but I think it's doable, and it's where we really need your buy-in. And I really hope you feel jazzed about this, because there's a lot of things we can do, and it's a great way for CHEO to lead on this issue. I'm just going to leave you with one last thought, because I know I always hit home hard on this issue, but I think this is an interesting way of looking at the whole problem. And it's a quote. It's not easy to sort of read quotes, but I'll read it out to you. By Caitlin Johnstone. It's a good way to think of society right now, especially with what's been happening in the news, even yesterday. We're just a confused species in an awkward transition phase, stumbling around the earth with massive prefrontal cortices overlying a bunch of primordial thick conditioning. I kind of just like this awkward transition phase. She goes on to talk about if you can imagine what whales were like, or I should say the ancestors of whales were like when they first went back into the water from being terrestrial species, and how awkward they looked as they tried to swim about until they evolved to have, the nostril on the top of their head, making things way more efficient, and how quite clumsy birds were when their ancestors first started to take to the air, and how it might have looked from an outsider's point of view at these sort of clumsy and awkward species taking flight and taking to the oceans without really knowing what the sort of long-term sort of purpose of nature had for them. And I guess I think it's a nice way to think of humanity as in being in a kind of an awkward phase, and being, in a pediatric hospital. I think we can really take that to heart. Okay, with that, I want to transfer to Richard. I think I've gone over a little bit over time, Richard. I'll let you sort of go from here. I'm going to stop sharing. Thanks, guys.
Hi, thanks so much, Curtis. So Curtis has really given us the sort of the argument for why there needs to be this transition to a low carbon healthcare. And fundamental to this journey to a net zero healthcare at CHEO is the moolah. We need to spend money. And for the purse strings to loosen, we need to have a very clear KPIs for this program. So the KPI, although Curtis and I and the green team at CHEO are really passionate about holistic environmental healthcare, the KPI for this program is about carbon, about measuring carbon savings and achieving an inspiring number. So Curtis has mentioned a little bit about what carbon footprinting is, but basically this comes from like the sort of like broader engineering sciences, this idea of life cycle assessments. And they do that across many different environmental outputs, one of which is carbon. And depending on your goal, you scope the project, the problem differently. So for us, we need to think about the system of the hospital, and we need to have conversations about what are we going to include in that system for upstream, downstream, and on-site emissions. So basically, there are two approaches for measuring carbon footprints. And it's worth talking about them because there are limitations with both. The simplest one is the product life cycle assessment, product LCA. So this is very much a bottom up. It's where the engineers get very excited. You give them a piece of PPE, you give them a scalpel, and they start breaking it down into its constituent pieces. How much plastic does it have? How much metal does it have? How much this, that, and the other? And then once you have this weight or quantity, you then go to databases about carbon intensity for given materials in different locations. And you then just cross multiply and sum up all the carbon for this individual product. Now, this is really effective if you're in an academic institute and you're studying one product at a time. But here at CHEO, that doesn't scale. We can't take a product lifecycle assessment, although we would like to look at the entirety of our hospital. Product lifecycle assessment allows comprehensiveness and granularity, but if you want to roll it out to looking at large systems like countries or companies, it just doesn't work. So the complement of that is this thing called organizational lifecycle assessment. And this takes a different approach to try and allow you to look at a much bigger system. And what this does, instead of breaking it down into constituent pieces of materials, it has to make certain assumptions that your financial spending can be a proxy for your activities and consumption. And then you just multiply your certain lines of your budget item by known carbon intensities. So let's say for business services, which might include paper printing, computers, ordering things, the money you spend on that, when you add it all up, you can multiply it by a business services carbon intensity. For drugs, we get drugs from lots of different pharmaceutical companies. They are not yet telling us how much carbon goes into each one of their drugs that they're providing to us. Maybe later there'll be regulations around this. But for now, we just have to make coarse guesses that our dollars spent on chemicals and pharmaceuticals can be multiplied by approximate carbon intensity factor. And then you add all these categories up and you get your total organizational carbon footprint. And clearly there is some nuances here. There is different methodologies we can use for this organizational footprint, and we can make tweaks to it to try and make it a bit more granular, to try and make it more robust. So as Curtis alluded to, when looking at an organization's carbon footprint, you can break it down into these different big bins, and across all industries, these big broad bins are called Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. So Scope 1 emissions is carbon dioxide and equivalent gases that have greenhouse gas warming potential leaving our site. They're either leaving our vehicles, they're either leaving our chimneys, or they're emitted from the medicines that we use on site, like anesthetic gases. So that's it's like on site, it's very clear, it's very measurable, there's very few of them. Then the second form of indirect carbon is CHEO is purchasing electricity, and there is a dirtiness, a certain amount of carbon associated with that electricity we're purchasing. So these scope 1 and 2 emissions are pretty easily measurable. And we know that for our baseline year of this Kick the Carbon program, there was approximately 7,000 CO2 equivalent tons of carbon emitted. So to put that into perspective, that means let's say there's 2,000 staff here at CHEO, each one has their own household with their certain like home and residential carbon footprints. When those 2,000 staff turn up to work, they're effectively each running a separate car that's emitting carbon. Like there is a huge, that every one of those staff is running their own car based here at CHEO, which adds up to these amazing 7,000 tons of carbon. And this is just from scope 1 and 2. To begin with, our Kick the Carbon program has focused on a 5% reduction for these direct and indirect purchase of energy, because it's very measurable. But the long-term vision is we're going to expand our definition of what net zero healthcare is here at CHEO, and we're going to try and include scope 3 emissions. So this is all the small jelly beans that Curtis was talking about. There's many things going on here. There's medical devices, medicine, food and catering, waste, running computers, business services. And you may wonder, well, some of these new line items that we're adding in that are in these scope 3, these indirect supply chain emissions, you might be able to see now that these are sort of intersecting more and more with like clinical delivery. So is it important to think about the impact of these, or can we just leave them? Can we exclude them from our vision of net zero healthcare? And as Curtis alluded to, we can't. We know from throughout the literature, the studies of life cycle assessments of different healthcare systems, like that of the UK's NHS, that roughly 2/3 of carbon emissions are associated with supply chain. So you can just see here in this pie chart from the UK that pretty much 1/3 of emissions are from pharmaceuticals and chemicals and medical equipment. This was a big surprise to me. I thought we could just, when I started this journey several years ago, Curtis had to sort of bang this into my head that this is not just changing buildings and water. There is huge carbon produced from consumption in hospitals. So how do we go about measuring this consumption of hospitals? I've kind of alluded to it, but I'm going to talk you through the data pipeline that we've developed here at CHEO, and we're developing to try and measure this, to try and give us sort of real-time quarterly feedback on our consumption and our carbon footprint. So we take in our invoices, and finance at CHEO has approved certain members of the green team to have access to this sort of highly sensitive fiscal data of CHEO's activities. So let's say there's 100,000 purchases a year here at CHEO and 10,000 unique items that are being purchased. Well, we then just aggregate that mess of raw data into expenses summarized by item. We can convert that into lumping certain items together into categories. So like a category like business services or pharmaceuticals. And then the real magic comes when you have to try and convert these financial categories into carbon. There needs to be a Rosetta Stone that allows us to convert from dollars spent of budget line items into carbon intensities. And unfortunately, in Canada, there is no unified Rosetta Stone for us to do this. CHEO is working with the University of Waterloo and some of the national leaders in this area. We're prototyping new ways to calculate our carbon footprint that might give us more high resolution estimate of our footprint. So once we've done that, we can spit out the carbon footprint, and from this template, we can then do analytics, and we can try and refine our strategy and refine our path forward. And we don't need to worry yet about this evolving organizational LCA, how this is approached. In short, CHEO is building a pipeline that, as the Wild West of carbon footprinting in healthcare evolves, we will be at the forefront of using the best techniques to get the carbon footprint early, often, and accurately, so we can make data-driven decisions. Here is some a summary of some work done by Peach, Ontario organization interested in low carbon healthcare. The red bars, the longer the bar represents the more, if we make that sudden activity or change, the more carbon that will be saved. Those bars that are red denote expenditures, and the cost of the expenditure is at the end of the bar, and those in green are cost savings. So this is just to say that it's not all, there are many items that can save money immediately and that can deliver substantial carbon savings, and we need to start working our way through them. Another form of data visualization is for exploring one's carbon footprint is something called carbon hotspot analysis. So you want to see in what sort of sectors are the biggest, juiciest jelly beans and of carbon that we should go in and we should start tackling. So far we've painted this picture of a vision towards net zero healthcare at CHEO. We've got ongoing, we have a 5-year strategy that is going to cost $5 million and is going to deliver every year, once it's executed, a $1.5 million return on investment, and take hundreds or thousands of cars off the road in equivalent carbon savings. We also have this framework for measuring carbon consumption related to our procurement. And that's going to act almost as a GPS. It gives us real-time feedback and allows us to adjust our course. But there are going to be unexpected twists and turns in the future ahead, like what we've experienced this weekend. And that is going to be overcome, hopefully, by the community of CHEO coming together, pulling all in the same direction. And basically, culture is going to eat strategy for lunch. We want people to step forward, start helping out on the front line and making refinements for the processes at CHEO so that we're delivering greener care. Now, this ask is a lot. We're all tired and exhausted and after the pandemic, and making innovations and changing processes, that's a grind at the best of the time, and it's bureaucratic and it's hard. So what we've done is we've tried to set up a process with the administration to try and facilitate these behavioral, policy, procurement changes to make it easier for frontline people that are passionate about making a difference in the climate crisis. So this is a sort of backdrop to some of this sort of bureaucracy behind the scenes. So there are 2 working groups. Faisal leads the Water and Energy Working Group, and Curtis leads the Sustainability Working Group. And they are going to be the touch points for the CHEO community when they have ideas for green, low carbon innovations. So you will turn up to these people, you'll maybe present your ideas informally, maybe formally at these working groups. These working groups will help you craft and refine your idea. And once you have like a simple one-pager SBAR, SBAR stands for situation, background, analysis, and recommendation. Once you have a one-page initial SBAR, that will be taken up to a monthly meeting with executives, with Darlene, who's the CFO of the hospital, with Trevor, who's in charge of facilities, Ken, who I'm sure you all know, who's in charge of VP safety, and a collection of other people. And the CHEO Kick the Carbon Steering Committee will review the initial SBAR, just a one-pager, a quick thing. If we give it the green light, the working groups and the clinical team will reconvene and will help draft a longer 5-page, 3 to 5-page SBAR. And this is going to cover things like more detailed things like capital costing, maybe a few different costing options from different companies, different suppliers, the amount of carbon savings. Now, that might be overwhelming to clinical teams wanting to make a difference. How do we calculate our carbon? Well, we're here to help. We're going to help you cost it and figure out the carbon savings. We'll also have to touch base with other stakeholders in the hospital to do with patient safety, PHAC, all sorts of stakeholders. And once that engagement has been done, the full SBAR will be taken back up to the steering committee. Hopefully with these many projects that are coming in, there'll have to be some prioritization, but there is funding available to then push down to these projects and get them going faster and quicker. Often the problem is these innovations happen and where does the money come from? Well, we have money ring-fenced for these projects, and that money is hopefully that pool of money is going to grow as the return on investments are sort of yielded from these other big capital changes in energy and infrastructure, green energy and infrastructure in our hospital. So there's many opportunities for leadership here. We're going to have an innovative, data-driven approach to a hospital carbon footprinting. We have a vision that CHEO is going to have be a leader in Canadian net zero healthcare. Now, that's going to be difficult. Like, we've got this old building around us, and I kind of see us a little bit as a bit like Battlestar Galactica, that old ship. We're running this old, beaten up ship, but we've got this amazing community of people that are going to come together and make it run as efficiently as possible and get the most out of it as we can. Maybe we can work with the city. There's amazing things going on here in Ottawa with the Race to Zero, and work with the Mayor's Climate Ambassador program. We've got good links to that program already. And then here at CHEO, we want to develop staff champions and get youth involved. What we don't want is we don't want you to feel anxious about climate change. There is so much we can do here, and the effort you put in here in the hospital is going to yield much more carbon savings than if you'd buy a Tesla or install a heat pump. We can make systems changings here, and you should feel empowered to do so. So to summarize, there are many benefits we can get from addressing climate change at CHEO, and they will yield financial savings. They will enhance the brand at CHEO. They will help build a resilient healthcare system through climate mitigation, so maybe it attenuates some of the global warming, but also we can think about putting in place some climate resiliency plans so we're ready for extreme weather events like we've just experienced. And most importantly, we'll be tackling climate change and have an even more inspiring workplace. So I think with that, I'll turn it over for questions, and thanks so much for your attendance today.
Let's see if there's any questions for this. Hi, everyone. Richard took over my computer, but we've got a few minutes left for questions. That was a really invigorating and insightful talk. I really enjoyed it. I'm gonna, vigorous head nod from Marianne. Any questions or thoughts?
I'll just say one thing I wanted to. No, I think this is a super exciting journey. I can understand that it might be a little bit intimidating to think about this kind of transformation, but a couple things to keep in mind. This is a long-term goal that I think we're here, like Richard says, we're here to support everything that's sort of undertaken. I think it's something we really just want you to keep in the back of your head as, what could I do at the hospital level? What could be changed, or where are things being consumed or wasted without really any benefit or very little benefit, or is there an alternative way we could do things? And I think that's something that, this is a new bottom line. I know that's, like Richard said, we're all tired and we're stressed, and there's a lot of things going on in healthcare, and I fully appreciate that. And in our individual lives, but this is a really important bottom line that has huge implications for everybody. And I think we just have to do it. And it will happen. I think it's, this is really interesting times we live in. But if we take this on, we would really make a big impact and change the trajectory of really society. One other thing I just want to clarify, the whole SBAR process, that sounds really complicated. That's really if you need funding and if you want some more formal support from the hospital, I think that's the process we'd like to go through. But I think you can make changes in your day-to-day life, and if you just sort of decide to do something at, as long as there's no, you're thinking about the impacts, obviously, safety and healthcare imperatives and financial, imperatives or other bottom lines are crucial. But, as long as you've got that in mind, if you realize you don't need to use a Bodger, whatever gadget, and you just let us know that you've stopped using it and you feel like this has made a change. I think we really do want to sort of keep track of the things we've changed.
Curtis, you've got a few questions in the chat.
So I'll just take them. So patient engagement. So I'm based in the Research Institute, so I have been working with the Research Family Advisory Committee. They have reviewed some of my grants that I've been applying for, which has been great. I've had great feedback from them. There was at the town hall for Earth Day, there was a speaker from a patient speaker, but we definitely want more family engagement. We think this is something that's really important to families, we think. I'm also going to be running a small research project with a medical resident student, looking at how doing a survey of how important this is to patients. In terms of energy supply through geothermal at CHEO, so that would be great. I think the new civic campus is going to be using geothermal, and we have been in talks with the city about using wastewater heating. So you put coolant into the sewers, and the hot water that leaves CHEO, you extract that that heat. It's one option. It's a new technology, so we're still not quite sure about it, but some feasibility has been performed close to campus. Curtis, any thoughts on geothermal? Oh, yeah, it's
Oh, you're on mute. He's talking, but he's
Curtis. I think you're on mute.
I just said hopefully for the future.
Lamia, you have a question?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the great presentation. So exciting to be to hear that the organization is interested in this. I just have a question about decreasing the carbon footprint. I've seen that in 2019 we had 7,000, and then in 2020 or 2021, I'm not sure, it lowered to 6,000. Is that because of the pandemic? Do you think that because a lot of employees actually, like all of us, we're not driving there, we're not using our offices? And I'm not sure if that took in account this effect of the pandemic.
That's a great question, very observant. So conceptually, we know that we have, with not driving, we have reduced our footprint massively. That isn't part of the system boundary for the scope 1 and scope 2. So the reduction you see there of 1,000 tons of carbon reduced, that doesn't include anything to do with travel. So that is to do with amazing work that has been done by the facilities team to reduce our carbon.
That's great.
Our usage of electricity may have been a little bit
low.
I'm
thinking of the offices because we're not using our offices anymore. Yeah.
So and obviously some years you have warmer winters and cooler summers, and it depends on that year-to-year variability. But we've been really happy to see with that. Basically, we're on track with that 5% reduction for the 2 or 3 years that the program has been running, which is really reassuring.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any more questions?
So it's coming up on 9:30. Just as the last comment, I'll add that as someone who has done some innovation in this space with our reusable mask product, I really think that the work CHEO's doing and getting, it's nice to see the executive and the leadership engaged, because as Richard mentioned early on, the innovation and the ideas is only one part of it. Getting buy-in and thinking it through and sort of implementing it is huge. So congratulations to you guys for working on that and putting that foundation in place so that when new innovations and ideas come up, there's a way to get them in as fast as possible. So thank you all for coming. If you have more questions.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Thank you. Contact us if you have any ideas, you want to do stuff, let us know.
Have a great green day.